I should have seen it coming. That's the thought that circles in my head as I stand in the blistering Nevada sun, staring at the empty space where our car used to be. I blink, trying to adjust to the glare, my eyes scanning the gas station parking lot as if the car might magically reappear. It doesn't. My wife, Alina, is gone. So are her friends. So is my wallet. So is my phone. So is everything I had. The pit in my stomach tightens as the hot wind kicks up a swirl of dust, coating the cracked pavement around me. The air is dry, suffocating. I swallow, my throat already feeling raw. They really left me. I tell myself, this has to be a joke. Alina and her friends are cruel, yes. They like to push boundaries, test limits, see how much I can take before I snap. But this feels different. I take a deep breath, trying to steady my nerves. It had been her idea, this stupid trip. Darren, you never bond with my friends, she had said a week ago, rolling her eyes as she tossed clothes into our suitcase. Come on, it'll be fun. It'll be good for us. I hadn't wanted to go. I never did. Her friends, Sophie, Rachel, Nina, they never hid their disdain for me. They threw insults like casual conversation, always finding new ways to belittle me, mock me, remind me I wasn't one of them. He's too serious, Alina. God, do you ever loosen up, Darren? You married a puppy, not a man. Alina never defended me. Not once. Instead, she laughed along with them, grinning while I swallowed every bite of their cruelty. And like an idiot, I went. Because I loved her. Or at least, I thought I did. The gas station sign flickers above me, buzzing like a dying insect. One pump. A tiny convenience store with shelves half empty. The kind of place where you stop only if you're desperate. We had been on the road for hours, heading to some lake house Rachel's boyfriend owned. I hadn't been paying attention to the route. I trusted them. Now I realize. That was my first mistake. The memory flickers in my head. Me stepping out of the car. The sound of laughter, fading into the distance. The soft hum of tires against pavement. And then nothing. I check my pockets. Lint. Loose change. No phone. No keys. No money. I should go inside, I tell myself. Find someone. Ask for help. But the second I turn toward the store, a sick feeling rolls through me. Something isn't right. This wasn't just a joke. This wasn't just them being cruel. This was planned. I step back, replaying the last few days. The way Rachel smirked when she accidentally spilled coffee in my lap. The way Sophie whispered something to Alina that made her laugh, and then they both glanced at me. The way Nina muttered, "He'll figure it out." The way Alina never looked me in the eye. My hands clench into fists. They'd been building up to something, and I'd been too blind to see it. Time drags. Minutes feel like hours. At first, I try to convince myself they'll be back. Any second now, I'll hear the tires crunch against gravel, see Alina grinning from the driver's seat, saying, "Gotcha," but the road stays quiet. The sky stretches endless and empty, mirroring the hollowness growing in my chest. 2 hours pass. Sweat drips down my neck. My throat is dry, lips cracking from the heat. I pace, kicking pebbles, heart pounding. It hits me then, really hits me. They're not coming back. Alina left me. She planned this. And she's not even looking back. A rush of memories flood me, fast and sharp, tearing through my chest. The time she flirted with her coworker right in front of me, then called me paranoid when I confronted her. The time she maxed out my credit card, then said I was being dramatic for caring. The time she laughed when I got laid off, telling her friends, "I guess I have to be the breadwinner now." And still I stayed. I took it. I let her win, over and over. But now, I'm standing alone, in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a pit in my stomach. And she's gone. A truck pulls up, its engine rumbling like thunder, snapping me out of my daze. The driver is a big guy, gray beard, ball cap stained with oil. He leans out the window, squinting at me. "You okay, buddy?" I open my mouth, but nothing comes out. I am not okay. I am abandoned. Stranded. Betrayed. I force myself to speak, my voice hoarse. My ride left me. The man nods, like this isn't the first time he's seen someone stranded out here. "Hop in," he says. "Where you headed?" "I don't know. Home. Back to Alina?" "No, not back to her." I climb into the cab, the door slamming shut behind me. As the truck pulls away, I don't look back at the gas station. There's nothing for me there. There's nothing for me in my old life anymore. Alina picked them over me. Again and again. And for 5 years, I let it happen. But standing there, alone, abandoned, left to rot, I realized something. They didn't break me. They set me free. I turned my gaze to the open road ahead. The sun is starting to set, painting the sky in burning oranges and reds. It feels like a beginning. It feels like revenge waiting to happen. And for the first time in years, I'm not afraid of what comes next. Not anymore. The first time I wake up gasping for air, I think it's just the heat. The Nevada sun had been unrelenting when the trucker dropped me off in Red Rock. I had no money, no phone, and no idea what to do next. But I wasn't in the mood to panic. Not yet. I found a shelter, thanks to a man named Roy. A no-nonsense, 50-something ex-military guy with sharp eyes that didn't waste time with pity. He saw me for what I was, a man at rock bottom. "You lost or just broke?" he had asked. "Both," I admitted. He grunted, handed me a clipboard. "Fill this out. You get a bed for the night. Tomorrow, we figure out the rest." That night, I lay on a cot in a room full of snoring strangers, staring at the ceiling, feeling the weight of Alina's betrayal pressing against my chest. I expected to be angry, maybe even shattered, but all I felt was numb. She left me. She had been building up to this for months, maybe even years, and I had been too blind to see it coming. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part would come later. The exhaustion started slow. At first, I chalked it up to stress, malnutrition, dehydration. I was starting over from nothing, barely making it through the days. Roy helped me land a dishwashing job at Margot's Diner, a greasy little place with busted booths and a coffee pot that never stopped brewing. The work was brutal. Hot water, endless plates, and Jacqueline, the diner's owner, who made me regret every mistake. "Move faster, kid. We ain't got all day." I moved faster. I had no choice. At night, I collapsed into bed, too tired to think. But the fatigue never went away. It got worse. My legs felt heavier, my breath shorter, my vision hazy at times. Then came the pain. A deep, gnawing ache in my side, radiating up my back. A twisting pressure in my gut, like something inside me was missing. And then, the blackouts. It happens for the first time on a Wednesday morning. I'm at the sink, scrubbing a dish, when suddenly the world tilts. My hands go numb. The diner spins. The sound of Jacqueline yelling fades to static. I collapse before I even realize what's happening. I wake up to fluorescent lights and beeping machines. A hospital. My head is throbbing, my mouth dry, my body screaming. Someone's talking, but it takes me a second to focus. "Darren, can you hear me?" A doctor, a middle-aged man with dark circles under his eyes and a clipboard in his hand. I try to sit up, but pain rips through my abdomen. "Easy," the doctor says. "You passed out at work. Your boss called an ambulance. We ran some tests." Something in his voice makes my blood run cold. "Is something wrong?" I rasp. The doctor exhales, flipping his clipboard shut. He looks at me like he's choosing his words carefully. "Darren, were you aware that you're missing a kidney?" My brain stutters. I laugh, short and sharp, because that's impossible. "What?" I say, even though I heard him perfectly. "Your right kidney is gone. It was surgically removed. And part of your liver is missing, too. There's evidence of a previous operation, stitches, surgical precision. But there are no medical records. No history of organ donation. No sign you were ever treated for this." I freeze. It doesn't make sense. I never had surgery. Never even had my tonsils removed. The doctor studies me, his eyes narrowing. "You honestly didn't know?" I don't answer. Because I do know. I feel it now. That deep, missing ache in my side. The exhaustion. The weakness. The way my body has been fighting against something it wasn't prepared for. I don't need a medical degree to put the pieces together. Alina. She did this. My stomach lurches, nausea rising like bile. I grip the thin hospital blanket so hard my knuckles go white. I think back, the road trip, the exhaustion, the way I kept feeling sluggish even before they left me at that gas station. She must have drugged me. She must have taken me somewhere, sold my organs, then dumped me like garbage. And the worst part? I never even felt it. They had stolen parts of me, and I never even knew. I don't remember leaving the hospital. I don't remember walking back to the shelter, or sitting on my cot, staring at the wall. I don't even remember breathing. All I know is that something inside me has shifted. I don't feel like the same man. For years, I was too weak to leave, too scared to fight back. I let Alina use me, humiliate me, tear me down, and I still loved her anyway. But now, Now, I know the truth. She never just wanted me gone. She wanted me harvested. That night, I don't sleep. I sit on the edge of the cot, listening to the sounds of the shelter. Coughs, snores, the occasional shuffle of feet. My mind is racing, replaying every memory, every detail I ignored. The way Sophie, Rachel, and Nina kept exchanging glances, whispering, smirking, like they were in on a joke I wasn't part of. The way Alina insisted I take those vitamins a few days before the trip, watching me swallow them with too much interest. The way she kissed me goodbye that morning. Soft, almost gentle, like she was saying goodbye to a corpse. I should feel rage. I should want to hunt her down, make her pay. But all I feel is clarity. This isn't just a betrayal. This isn't just a cruel prank. This is business. And if Alina and Victor thought I was just another disposable body, another nobody in their long list of victims, they made a mistake. Because I'm still here. And I'm coming for them. The old Darren died that day in the hospital. I walked out of there a different man, not just physically, but mentally. Something in me had snapped, like a wire stretched too thin for too long. I had spent my whole life being the good guy. The one who swallowed insults, who ignored the warning signs, who believed in second chances. And what did that get me? My body carved apart. My life discarded. No more. I stood outside that hospital, my hands shoved into the pockets of my secondhand jacket, staring up at the sky. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that sank into your bones, but I barely felt it. Alina thought I was dead. Victor thought I was just another faceless victim, another body on their list of people they'd bled dry. They didn't expect me to survive. They didn't expect me to find out. And most of all, they didn't expect me to come back. Disappearing was the first step. The first thing I did was erase myself. The shelter had helped me get a replacement ID, something I could use to start over. I could have gone back to my old life, tried to call in favors, find old friends, rebuild. But my old life was gone. Alina had burned it to the ground, and I had no interest in rebuilding ashes. Instead, I disappeared. I cut my hair, grew a beard, stopped using my real name. I took cash-only jobs, the kind that didn't ask too many questions. Dishwashing, janitorial work, loading docks. At night, I kept moving, never staying in one place too long. No credit cards, no phone registered in my name. Nothing that could tie me to the man I used to be. I became a ghost. And as I worked, I listened. Because if I was going to hunt them down, I needed more than just anger. I needed information. Learning the trade. It started small. A bartender here. A truck driver there. People who'd seen things, who whispered about the black market trade in hushed voices. I started piecing together how it worked. Where people disappeared. Who ran things behind the scenes. And I kept digging. After a few months, I got a new job. One that put me closer to the shadows. Margot's Diner had been a good start, but I needed more than just dirty plates and greasy counters. So, I took a job at a warehouse on the outskirts of Ridgeview City. The place was off the books. No real name. No official records. It was the kind of place that moved things that weren't supposed to exist. Weapons. Drugs. And, as I soon learned, organs. I kept my head down. Played dumb. Acted like just another guy looking for a paycheck. And I learned everything. Finding their names. It didn't take long before I found Victor's trail. He was still in business, still thriving. But now he was bigger. More powerful. He had contacts all over the country. A network of doctors, surgeons, middlemen. And Alina? She was still with him. Still laughing at the joke they made out of my life. They had taken everything from me, and it wasn't enough. Now, they were wealthy. Comfortable. Living in a penthouse overlooking Ridgeview City, throwing lavish parties paid for in blood. The thought of it made my fingers curl into fists. But I didn't let the rage take over. Not yet. Because I knew one thing for sure. Revenge without patience is just self-destruction. And I had no intention of destroying myself. They were the ones who were going to break. Building my arsenal. If I was going to take them down, I needed more than just knowledge. I needed skills. Resources. A plan. So I trained. I found gyms in back alleys, where ex-fighters and underground boxers taught lessons for cash. I learned how to fight, not like a brawler, but with purpose. How to throw a punch that didn't just hurt, but incapacitated. How to take a hit and keep moving. How to break a man with my bare hands. And I studied. I learned how the black market trade operated, how payments were funneled, how victims disappeared without a trace. I found others like me, people who had been stolen from, used, discarded. And I listened to their stories. Every piece of information became a weapon. Every connection became an advantage. And slowly, I started building something. Not just a plan. A reckoning. Patience is a killer's best friend. It took years. Years of silence. Watching. Waiting. Alina and Victor had no idea I was alive. They had no idea that every move they made was being tracked. While they lived their comfortable lives, I was studying every weakness they had. Victor was careless with his finances. Alina was reckless with her connections. They had enemies, rivals in the trade, people who wanted them gone. And I made sure to become the missing piece in that puzzle. I wasn't just going to kill them. That would be too easy. I was going to unravel them. I was going to make sure that when they saw me again, it would be too late to run. Becoming the man they should have feared. By the time I was ready, I wasn't Darren anymore. The man who loved Alina. The man who trusted too easily. The man who walked into that gas station thinking he was safe. He was dead. The only thing left was the ghost of who I used to be. And that ghost had unfinished business. The first step toward the end. Victor and Alina had spent years destroying people, leaving bodies and broken lives in their wake. And they thought they had gotten away with it. They thought they were untouchable. But they were wrong. Because the past doesn't stay buried. And neither do ghosts. So when they received a private invitation, a business deal too good to ignore, a secret meeting with a buyer who promised them millions, they didn't think twice. They said yes. And just like that, they stepped into my trap. They say revenge is best served cold. I disagree. Revenge is calculated, measured, precise. It is not an explosion of anger but a slow, surgical cut, deep, controlled, inescapable. And I was ready to start cutting. The invitation to the end. Victor and Alina were still thriving, still trading in human lives like commodities. They had expanded their business, black market surgeries, underground clinics, organ harvesting rings stretching across multiple cities. More victims, more bodies, more people like me. But despite their power and influence, they were greedy. And greedy people are easy to trap. Through my new connections, former victims, underground contacts, information dealers, I fabricated an opportunity they couldn't resist. A secret medical deal. One promising millions in exchange for exclusive, high-value donors. A client so wealthy and powerful that they couldn't afford to say no. The bait was set. And they took it. A meeting in the dark. I chose the location carefully, an abandoned surgical facility outside Ridgeview City. Not a crumbling ruin. No, something better. A hospital that had been shut down for malpractice, its halls still intact, its walls still sterile. Operating rooms that had once been filled with real doctors, now hollow and lifeless. Fitting. Because tonight, it would be filled with ghosts. Victor and Alina arrived just before midnight. They were expecting someone else. A faceless buyer, someone powerful, a new business venture to feed their greed. Instead, they walked into my world. The first thing they noticed was the silence. No assistants. No security. No flashing smiles or eager investors. Just dim lighting, cold walls, and the distant hum of electricity. Victor frowned, adjusting his tailored suit, his sharp surgeon's hands twitching at his sides. Alina followed, heels clicking against the tile floor. She was dressed expensively, her hair shorter, her eyes sharper. She had aged, but not in the way a normal person does. She had aged into a predator. They stepped forward cautiously. "Where is everyone?" Alina muttered, her voice barely a whisper. Victor checked his watch, irritation flickering across his face. "This doesn't feel right," he said. "Good." Revealing the ghost. The lights flickered once, then flooded the room. I was already sitting there, waiting, watching, silent. For a moment, neither of them moved. Alina's eyes went wide, her mouth parting as if she wanted to scream, but forgot how. Victor's face drained of color, his entire body going still, the way an animal freezes when it realizes it has walked into a trap. I let the silence stretch. Let them process it. Let them understand. Then I smiled. Slow. Easy. Controlled. "It's been a long time," I said. Alina's legs gave out. She grabbed the nearest chair, sinking into it, gasping like a woman who had seen a ghost. Victor wasn't as weak. His fear turned to anger, his posture shifting. "You're dead," he muttered, almost to himself. "Not quite," I said, leaning forward. "But I hear that's your specialty, isn't it? Watching them break. For a few minutes, they tried to play it smart. Tried to rationalize, control, negotiate. Darren. Alina breathed, her voice laced with forced sweetness, her expression carefully neutral. I don't know what happened to you, but... No. I cut her off, my voice like steel. She flinched. I stood up slowly, walking toward them, my footsteps echoing in the empty room. You know exactly what happened to me, Alina. I watched the way her fingers curled against the table, the way her breath hitched, subtle, but enough to show me that she knew there was no talking her way out of this. Victor, however, was not as smart. If you came here for money, I'll double whatever you were offered. He snapped, arms crossing, his arrogance creeping back. I laughed. Not loud. Not forced. Just low and amused. Money. I repeated. You think this is about money? I took another step forward. Victor stiffened. Alina shuddered. You took my organs. The words came out even. Steady. Almost casual. You carved me open. Sold me. Dumped me in the middle of nowhere, expecting me to die. Silence. Alina's breathing turned shallow. Victor tilted his chin, trying to maintain control. It was business, he said. Flat. Emotionless. A simple fact. And that was the moment I knew I could break him. No escape. The door locked behind them. They didn't hear it. Not until Victor moved to step back and realized there was no way out. His body tensed. Alina's hand flew to her neck, as if checking for a pulse. I leaned in slightly. Do you know what happens to people who steal from the wrong people, Victor? I asked, keeping my voice calm, measured, thoughtful. He swallowed hard. I let the silence stretch before answering my own question. They become inventory. Alina let out a strangled noise, somewhere between a sob and a breathless plea. Victor, for all his arrogance, was now visibly sweating. This isn't. Darren, we can fix this, Alina stammered, her voice cracking. It was a mistake. I cocked my head. Was it? She nodded, frantically, clinging to the last shreds of her hope. Yes. Yes. We were young, reckless. We didn't think you'd survive. I finished for her. She went still. And then, finally, she understood. This wasn't a conversation. This wasn't a negotiation. This was a sentence. Delivering justice. I had no interest in killing them quickly. That would be a mercy. Instead, I did something far worse. I let them see what was coming. The doors opened again, and they weren't alone anymore. Figures stepped into the room, people like me. Survivors. Victims. People whose lives Victor and Alina had ripped apart. They didn't come for revenge. They came for justice. Victor's face crumbled. Alina finally started screaming. The final words. I stood at the edge of the room, watching as the ghosts of their past came to collect their debt. Alina's screams became sobs. Victor's confidence dissolved into terror. And I simply walked away. Because they weren't my problem anymore. I had buried Darren a long time ago. The only thing left was a man with nothing to lose. And as the doors closed behind me, sealing them inside that cold, sterile room, I knew, without a doubt, this was the end of their story, and the beginning of mine. Revenge doesn't come with fireworks. There's no cinematic climax, no instant satisfaction, no dramatic speeches where the villain admits their sins before meeting their fate. Real revenge is silent, cold, inevitable. And tonight, I am the silence creeping in. A night they would never forget. The night I left Victor and Alina trapped in that abandoned operating room. I didn't look back. I had already planned exactly how it would go down. I wasn't going to kill them. That was too easy. I was going to undo them. Everything they built, the wealth, the status, the power, it was all stolen from the bodies of others. And now, it was going to crumble. Because I had taken everything they relied on to survive. The fall begins. The next morning, news broke like wildfire. Authorities raided several underground clinics tied to Victor's black market network. Dozens of arrests followed. Medical records, bank transfers, offshore accounts, all linked back to him and Alina. And the best part? I had already sent the evidence to their investors, their partners, their entire network. By noon, Victor and Alina had no allies left. By sunset, they had nowhere to run. Their last option. Desperation makes people stupid. And that's exactly what I was counting on. Victor and Alina, once untouchable, were now hunted. The law wanted them. Their old partners wanted them. Hell, even the people they used to bribe were now turning on them, too afraid to get caught in the crossfire. They had one option left. Me. They thought I was their way out. They thought I would give them mercy. So when Alina finally called me, her voice shaking, desperate, I knew it was time to finish this. Darren, please, she whispered through the phone, barely holding back tears. We need your help. I let the silence stretch before answering. Where are you? She sobbed. We can't stay here. They're looking for us. I know, I said. Calm. Even. Icy. I have a safe place. But you need to come alone. A pause. Then a shaky breath. Okay. Welcome to the end. The meeting place was a warehouse on the edge of Ridgeview City, one of the many locations they had once used for organ extractions. It was poetic in a way. Victor and Alina had lured people to places like this for years, convincing them they were safe, only to cut them open and leave them for dead. And now, it was their turn to step into the trap. The moment she saw me, Alina arrived alone. She was barely recognizable. Her once expensive clothes were torn and dirty, her hair disheveled, her face pale with exhaustion. She had been running, hiding, losing. And when she stepped into the dimly lit warehouse, her breath came out in short, frantic gasps. Darren, she called out, her voice small. I didn't answer. Not at first. I wanted her to feel it. The same fear and uncertainty I had felt when she left me for dead. The silence wrapped around her like a noose. And then, I stepped forward, out of the shadows. She turned and froze. Her body locked up like she had been struck by lightning. Her face drained of color. And then, she screamed. Not a cry for help. Not a plea for mercy. No, this was pure, raw horror. Because in that moment, she knew. She had walked straight into her own nightmare. The breakdown. No, 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 she whispered, stumbling back. You were supposed to. She cut herself off. But I already knew. I was supposed to die. I took another slow step toward her, watching as she shook uncontrollably, her breath coming out in shallow, panicked bursts. You thought I was gone, I said softly. She choked on a sob. Darren, Shoo. Her lips snapped shut instantly. The power dynamic had shifted. She was no longer in control. She was not the predator anymore. She was the prey. Victor's mistake. Before she could speak again, another set of footsteps echoed through the warehouse. Victor. Unlike Alina, he didn't look terrified. He looked angry, defiant, arrogant. I should have finished the job, he snarled, stepping forward. You think you can? I punched him. Hard. The impact sent him staggering back, blood dripping from his split lip. He barely had time to react before I grabbed him by the collar and slammed him into the nearest metal beam. Alina screamed, but I ignored her. I leaned in, my voice low and cold. You took my organs. You left me to die. Victor spat blood onto the floor. It was business, he growled, still trying to act tough. I pressed my forearm against his throat, cutting off his air. So is this, I whispered. No mercy. Victor was too dangerous to let live. And Alina? She wasn't worth killing. She was worth suffering. So I let her watch. I let her see what happens when you play God with people's lives. And when it was over, when Victor took his last breath, I turned to Alina. Her eyes were swollen, her hands covering her mouth, her entire body trembling. Please, she whispered. I tilted my head. Please what? Please don't kill me. I smiled. Oh, Alina. I took a slow step forward. You don't get to die that easily. She let out a broken sob, collapsing onto her knees. Then what? What are you going to do? I crouched in front of her, making sure she felt every single word. I'm going to let you live. Her breath hitched. I'm going to make sure you feel what it's like to be abandoned. Forgotten. Powerless. Her body shook violently. Everything you had is gone. Victor is gone. Your money, your protection, your influence, it's all gone. Her lips quivered. Please, she whispered again. I leaned in. Find your own way out, I said. And then I walked away, leaving her exactly as she left me. Alone. Betrayed. With nothing left. The true victory. I didn't look back. I didn't need to. Alina's sobs faded into the distance as I walked out into the cool night air. I had spent years planning this moment. Years building up to this final confrontation. But standing there, breathing, free, untouched, I realized something. The best revenge wasn't in the violence. It wasn't in watching Victor die. It wasn't in leaving Alina broken. The best revenge was living. Free. Unchained. Without them. So as I stepped into the darkness, disappearing once more, I let them go. Because this was my beginning. The night I walked away from Alina, I expected to feel relief. Years of pain, betrayal, and planning had led to that moment. The moment where she lost everything, where Victor took his last breath, where justice, in its purest form, had been delivered. And yet, as I walked into the cool, empty streets of Ridgeview City, there was no rush of satisfaction, no sense of victory. Because deep down, I knew this wasn't over. Not yet. The loose ends. Alina wasn't the only one involved in the black market trade. Victor wasn't the only doctor profiting from stolen lives. There were others. Others who had financed them. Others who had enabled them. Others who were still out there, free, untouched. I had gone after the head of the beast, but now? Now I had to burn the rest of it to the ground. Because if I didn't, then this would keep happening. More people would wake up in hospital beds, missing pieces of themselves they never agreed to give. More people would be sold, discarded, erased. And I couldn't let that happen. Not when I had the power to end it. The first target. I spent weeks tracking down the names Victor had buried. Names of investors, brokers, middlemen, people who had profited in the shadows. The first name on my list? Martin Bellows. A high-ranking corporate executive, a man with clean hands and a filthy business. He wasn't a surgeon like Victor. No, Bellows was the kind of man who made the deals, but never got his own hands bloody. He was untouchable, hidden behind shell companies, fake charities, political connections. A man who had never faced consequences. A man who thought he couldn't be reached. I was going to prove him wrong. Getting close. Bellows wasn't careless. Unlike Victor, he didn't operate in secrecy out of arrogance. He operated in secrecy because he was smart. His meetings were always behind closed doors, his conversations encrypted, his security tight. If I wanted to get to him, I couldn't kick down his door and drag him into the street. No, I had to get close. And I had just the right leverage. Setting the bait. People like Bellows only trust one thing, money. So I created a ghost investor, a fabricated identity with enough digital paper trails to appear legitimate. I leaked just enough information into the right channels, the whispers of a private investor looking to expand into exclusive markets. Bellows bid immediately. Within 2 weeks, I had a meeting. The dinner meeting. Bellows chose a high-end restaurant in the city, the kind of place where the wine cost more than 3 months of rent. He arrived in an expensive suit, his silver hair slicked back, his smug confidence dripping from every movement. To him, this was just another business deal. Just another way to profit off the suffering of others. I let him talk. Let him pitch me his numbers, his percentages, his guaranteed profits. It's all very secure, he said, swirling his wine, a smirk playing at his lips. Unlike our competitors, we offer stability. Competitors? I echoed, tilting my head. His smile widened. Oh yes, he said. People like Victor were small players. That's why they get caught. I kept my expression neutral. And you don't get caught? Bellows chuckled. My dear friend, I don't make mistakes. I smiled. Neither do I. And then, I set my phone on the table. I pressed play. And Bellows' smirk vanished. Because the voice that filled the room wasn't mine. It was his. Exposing the rot. The recording was clear. Crystal clear. A conversation I had secretly recorded while he outlined his entire operation, his profits, his method of recruitment. His face went pale. His hands trembled as he reached for his wine, his carefully crafted mask starting to crack. He started, his voice tight. You're done, I said simply, cutting him off. I leaned forward, letting my words sink into him. Your accounts have been flagged. Your partners have been exposed. Every document, every transaction, every dirty deal you've ever made. It's all been handed over. Bellows stiffened. You're bluffing. I let the silence stretch. Then I pulled out one last folder. I slid it across the table. He opened it, his hands shaking. And as his eyes flicked over the confidential reports, the signed contracts, the bank transactions leading straight back to him, his whole body slumped. He knew. It was over. The price of his sins. Bellows wasn't arrested that night. No. He disappeared. By morning, his company's assets had been seized. His business partners? All under investigation. His name? Wiped from the elite circles he once ruled. And Bellows himself? Never seen again. Maybe he ran. Maybe his own people turned on him. Maybe he finally faced the weight of his sins. I didn't care. Because he was gone. And that was enough. A promise to keep going. Bellows was the first. But not the last. His name had been one of many. And I was going to bring them all down, one by one, because this wasn't just about revenge anymore. This was about justice. This was about every person they thought they could discard. This was about making sure no one else woke up in a hospital bed missing pieces of themselves. This was about burning their entire empire to the ground. And I was just getting started. No rest for the wicked. I stood on the edge of Ridgeview City, the skyline stretching out before me, my hands tucked into my pockets. Somewhere out there, the rest of them were still living their lives, still thinking they were safe. They weren't, because I was coming. And this time, there would be no mercy. Justice is not an event. It is a process, one that unfolds slowly, deliberately, with the patience of a hunter waiting for his prey to exhaust itself. And I had been very patient. For months, I had been dismantling the network Victor and Alina had built. One by one, the men and women who had turned a blind eye to human suffering fell. Martin Bellows was the first. He vanished, his empire crumbling under the weight of his own greed. Dr. Salinas was next, a surgeon who had built his reputation on black market transplants, making himself indispensable to the elite. His arrest made headlines. Then came Adrian Clark, the banker who funneled millions through offshore accounts. He was caught trying to flee the country, dragged off a private jet in handcuffs. Each one of them owed a debt, and I made sure they paid in full. But there was one more name left on my list, a name that made my blood run cold every time I thought about it. Alina, the last survivor. It had been 6 months since I left her broken, sobbing, alone. I had expected her to disappear, to go into hiding, to vanish into the darkness like the coward she was. But Alina was a survivor. She didn't vanish. She adapted. She had lost everything, her wealth, her power, the life she had built with Victor. And yet, somehow, she was still standing. That meant one thing. She had found a way to rebuild. And I needed to know how. Tracking a ghost. Alina had changed her name. She had cut her hair, lost weight, slipped into a different identity. But she had one weakness. She was too proud to start over from nothing. So I followed the money. The bank accounts she tried to scrub clean. The anonymous payments she thought were untraceable. The new business ventures she had set up under fake names. She had been careful, but not careful enough. Because after months of hunting, I finally found her location. She was living in a penthouse in Crestmore, a quiet, elite neighborhood just outside the city. A safe house, protected by layers of security and deception. But there was one thing she hadn't accounted for. Me. The return of the dead. I waited for the right night. A night when the skies were dark, the streets empty, and the city asleep. Then, I made my move. Slipping into the secure complex was easy. I had spent months preparing for this. Studying her new routines, her new connections, the way she had built her world back up from the ashes. I moved through the hallways like a shadow, unseen, unheard. By the time I reached her penthouse door, my heartbeat was steady. There was no hesitation, no second thoughts. This was justice. I pulled out a small device and overrode the security system. The lock clicked open, and I stepped inside. The reunion she never wanted. Alina was standing by the window, staring out over the city, a glass of wine in her hand. She didn't hear me at first, not until I locked the door behind me. She turned instantly, her body tensing, ready to run. But then, she saw me, and she froze. The glass slipped from her fingers, shattering on the hardwood floor. For a moment, she didn't speak, didn't breathe. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she choked out one word. No. I took a slow step forward. Did you think you could escape me? I asked. Her lips parted, but no words came out. I watched the way her hands trembled, the way her eyes darted toward the door, calculating, desperate. Go ahead, I said. Try to run. She didn't. Because she knew. There was nowhere left to go. The last lie. Darren. She finally whispered, her voice cracking with fear. I didn't have a choice. I laughed. A low, bitter sound. Didn't have a choice? I repeated. You sold my organs while I was unconscious, Alina. She flinched. I didn't know Victor was going to. I grabbed her by the chin, forcing her to look at me. Don't lie to me. Her eyes filled with tears. But I wasn't falling for it this time. I had spent years letting her manipulate me, twist the truth, turn herself into the victim. Not anymore. I trusted you, I said. I loved you. She let out a shaky breath, her body sagging in my grip. I loved you too, she whispered. I let go. She stumbled back, her shoulders heaving. And then she did the one thing I didn't expect. She dropped to her knees, hands pressed together, begging, "Please, Darren. Please don't kill me." Her final debt. I crouched down, watching her closely. The woman in front of me wasn't the Alina I once knew. She wasn't powerful. She wasn't untouchable. She was pathetic, a ghost of herself. I let the silence stretch, let her feel the weight of her own desperation. Then, in a voice as cold as steel, I whispered, "You're not going to die tonight, Alina." Her head snapped up. Hope flickered in her eyes. But I wasn't done. "You don't get to escape this," I said. "You don't get the easy way out." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a small envelope. I dropped it in front of her. She hesitated, then shakily picked it up. Inside were documents, legal paperwork, financial records, proof that every single dollar she had left, every secret account, every hidden asset, was being transferred to charities, to medical funds for victims of the black market trade, to the very people she had helped destroy. Her entire fortune? Gone. And there was nothing she could do to stop it. Her lips trembled. You took everything from me," I said. "Now I'm taking everything from you." The end of the road. Alina collapsed onto the floor, sobbing, broken, alone. And for the first time in my life, I felt nothing for her. No pity, no hatred, no lingering sadness, just peace. I turned away, walking toward the door. Her choked sobs followed me, but I didn't stop. I had done what I came to do. Her debt was paid, and I was finally free. A new beginning. That night, I disappeared for the last time. No more hunting, no more revenge. Just a quiet life waiting for me in a place no one knew my name. Because after everything, after the betrayal, the suffering, the loss, I had finally won. And that was enough. Freedom is a strange thing. For years, it was all I wanted. To be free of Alina, free of Victor, free of the past that had hollowed me out and left me a walking corpse. Now I had it. And yet, even in the silence of my new life, I could feel it. A shadow, lingering just beyond my reach. A whisper of the past, reminding me, it's never truly over. The final goodbye. I left Ridgeview City the same way I had arrived. Alone, unnoticed, without a trace. No farewells. No loose ends. Alina's bank accounts had been drained. Her power? Stripped away. Her life? Worthless. She had nothing left but her own regrets. And that was all I needed. I boarded a bus heading west, with nothing but a single bag, a cheap phone, and the weight of a life I had burned to the ground. The past was over. Or so I thought. A new life, a new name. I found my way to a quiet town in the mountains, far from the reach of anyone who had ever known me. A place where the air was clean, the nights were silent, and no one asked too many questions. It was the kind of town where people came to disappear. Perfect. I took on a new name, a new routine. A simple job, handyman for a small inn, fixing leaky pipes and creaky floors. It wasn't much. But for the first time in years, I felt something close to peace. The ghosts still followed. But ghosts don't just vanish. Some nights, I'd wake up in a cold sweat, hearing Alina's broken sobs. Other nights, I'd dream of that hospital room. The moment the doctor told me my body had been carved apart without my consent. And sometimes, when I walked down the quiet streets, I'd feel it. A presence. A flicker of movement just outside my vision. Like someone was watching. At first, I told myself it was paranoia. That after years of being hunted, my mind was simply wired to expect danger. But then the letters started arriving. The letters from nowhere. They weren't threats. Not exactly. Just short notes. Always handwritten. Always left somewhere only I would find them. Under my windshield wiper. Tucked inside the inn's toolbox. Slipped under my apartment door. The first one was just 2 words. Still watching. The second? Loose ends never stay tied. By the time the 5th letter arrived, I knew. This wasn't paranoia. This was real. Someone had found me. Someone who wasn't finished with me yet. The return of an old enemy. It took a month before I saw him. A familiar face. One I had hoped was buried along with the life I left behind. Leon Mercer. One of Victor's old associates. A man who had operated in the background, pulling strings, making sure the right people looked the other way. A man I had underestimated. He found me in the middle of town, stepping into the small coffee shop where I had begun spending my mornings. Sat down across from me like we were old friends. Smiled like this was just another business deal. "You're a hard man to track down," he said, stirring his coffee. I didn't answer. Didn't move. Because I already knew. This wasn't a social call. The debt I didn't pay. Victor was a fool, Leon said, taking a slow sip from his cup. So was Alina. But you? You were different. I leaned back, fingers curling around my own mug, watching him. What do you want, Leon? He chuckled. Come on, Darren. You think you can burn an empire and just walk away? His eyes flicked toward the window, where the mountains stretched beyond the horizon. You think hiding in the middle of nowhere erases the past? I stayed silent. He sighed, setting his cup down with a soft clink. I'll give you credit. You took out some powerful people, but you didn't take out all of them. He tapped a single finger against the table. And that means you owe me something. The last job. I exhaled slowly. And if I say no? Leon smiled. You won't. Because you know how this works. I did. Leon had contacts everywhere. The moment he had found me, it was over. Running wouldn't help. Hiding wouldn't matter. He had one last job for me. One last name. And if I wanted to keep my new life, I had to do this one last thing. I took a slow sip of my coffee, my fingers steady, my heartbeat calm. Who? Leon's smile widened. Now we're talking. The final name. The name he gave me wasn't one I expected. It wasn't a surgeon. It wasn't a banker. It wasn't another businessman hiding behind wealth and power. It was someone even worse. A politician. A man who had been shielding the entire operation, keeping the authorities from digging too deep, making sure people like Victor and Alina had a safety net. A man who had never been touched. And Leon? Leon wanted him gone. The choice. It was an easy decision. Because even though I had left the past behind, I knew one thing. If this man stayed in power, then another Victor would rise. Another Alina. Another network, built on human suffering, fueled by greed. So I nodded. Tell me what I need to do. Leon grinned. Thought you'd say that. The final hunt. I left town that night. No goodbyes. No lingering attachments. Because this was it. The last name. The last debt. The last shadow. Once this was over, then maybe, just maybe, I could finally be free. So I stepped into the darkness, my past following behind me like a silent ghost. And I prepared to kill the last monster in my way.